Well, welcome once more from Leicester in the UK. I'm Nigel. I'm part of the Central UK chapter of God Squad, and I'm looking at Mark 9:33 to 37. Well, I'm going to read it because it's a short passage. Well, they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet because on the way they'd argued about who was greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be the first must be the very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." Well, this is a bit of a shift, really. And Jesus is bringing in this idea of this new social order, this different way. Well, firstly, you can imagine these disciples walking along, maybe in a little group. Jesus was probably behind them, and sometimes, we do that with our wives, and we'll have two little groups moving up through a park or something. But you could imagine them there and starting to argue and arguing among themselves. And it wasn't good because they were actually arguing about who was the greatest. Well, Jesus didn't come up to them and say, "Oh, leave it out, fellas, stop arguing." He just let them do it. And he often does that with us. He lets us do it, and then he'll pick us up later. So it's a common question, isn't it? Who's the greatest? Who's the greatest among us? And in our society, we've got those who appear to be the greatest in society, in our world. And you often hear this terminology, the top jobs. And the top jobs are like Prime Minister or Director of a company or those who have real influence. But for Jesus, the top jobs were a little bit different. And I myself see top jobs as different. They're certainly not top jobs to me. In fact, the role I'm doing now is maybe for me a top job because it's working for Christ, and it's leading people in worship, and for me it's nothing better. But getting this satisfaction from what we do, that's more important for me than these great titles. It was quite interesting. Also, I've just written this book, and with books, you can tend to be looking for them in bookshops and stuff like that, and thinking, how well's that selling? But for me, it was really important that this was a book on a Christian book and a book that led people to Jesus. And so it's so easy to fixate on the wrong thing, but really it's the main thing that we should be doing in whatever we do is pointing people to Jesus as Christians, because he's the one who can help us, who can help us to live and bring salvation into our lives. So there's these top jobs. There's those who have got influence, and they seem to be the important ones as well. But influence is all right, as long as it's influence for the right reason. Jesus had a lot of influence, but his influence was from a servant heart, and so he influenced people to lead a different life, to follow a different way. So influence is important in our society. Importance as well, important people, and I see them all the time. Some dignitaries, some are great, but some just love the importance. They love the best seats in churches, if they're in sometimes, and a bit like when Jesus talked about the important places in the synagogues. I remember some clergy when they had a big gathering at the cathedral, an ornate decoration, and they were almost pruning themselves, looking in the mirror. And Alice, my wife, was looking out through the window. It wasn't a mirror, it was the window actually, and she could see them all doing that and making the poses. And for me, it's quite entertaining, and I'm quite glad as a biker that what we wear is pretty much the same. We all wear the same cut-offs. Our tags are slightly different, but there's no ornate colours or anything like that. And I'm pretty glad about that. There's an equality. So the disciples, they were talking about who's the greatest, arguing about it. And you could imagine Jesus, asked them later, what you arguing about? And you could imagine them saying something like, well, they kept quiet to start with, didn't they? So you could imagine them looking down at the shoes and a bit embarrassed about it. Or you could imagine them coming in with excuses. Oh, we're just talking about whether V twins are better than M8s. And I've got my bike here, and it's a twin cam engine. Not a V twin, a twin cam engine. And I mean, obviously, twin cam engines are better than M8s, but that's neither here nor there. But you could imagine them coming up with some story. We're just talking about this. But the trouble is with Jesus, Jesus knows, and we can try and fool him sometimes. We can try and pull the wool over his eyes, but he knows. So it's pointless. We need to be straight and honest with him. So Jesus, he doesn't say, well, I know what you were talking about. You're arguing about being greatest. No, he says, oh, come over here to the 12, gathers them. And then he just, rather than pointing the finger, he just starts talking. If you want to be the greatest, you must be last. So the first will be last, and the last will be first. So he turns it on its head. Those who think they're the first among you, no, it's those who are last. It's a new social order. It's different. And then he says, whoever's going to be greatest must be the servant of all. Oh, not so popular now. You could imagine the disciples thinking. But this is what's important. Jesus came with authority. He came teaching. He came as fully God, the one who was in heaven with the Father, who created the world and the universe. But now he came to earth as a baby, grew up in Israel, and he came as a servant. So he was a servant while he was on earth, but he still had authority. And sometimes we don't have to jettison one for the other. We need authority, but we've got to have this servant heart, and hopefully for us that's the case. And then he sort of makes it worse for them, because then it's almost like he's got this child set up to pick up, but it put this child in the midst of them, and he picks this child up, and he says, you must be like a little child. Whoever welcomes one of these little ones in my name welcomes me. Well, what was he saying? Should we all jettison our jobs and go and work in childcare? Well, no. We need to welcome children, yes. But what he was saying was, this child represents those who are really important. It says those with no achievements, because a child's not achieved anything. I've got 3 grandchildren, and we had them round, and they didn't. The best achievement some of them had was keeping the colours in the lines when they're colouring. So it's not about achievement. So they're not bigging themselves up. It's not about social status, because they don't really have any. I mean, in society now, we sometimes put kids on pedestals, but in Jesus' time, they were the least of the least. They were disregarded. And so they had no social status. And he's almost saying, if you welcome those with little social status, you welcome me. And you've got the small child, and the small child needs help. He needs being cared for. I know my grandkids do. They can't get their own food, so an adult has to go and get it. They need to be served. They need to be loved. And for us, whoever welcomes one like a little child, Jesus says, welcomes me, but not me only, but he welcomes the Father, the one who sent me. So let's do that. Let's welcome those who have little status. See those as the important ones, the greatest. And let's welcome Jesus and welcome the Father through the way we go onto the fringes and in those sidelines of society sometimes, where the first will be last and the last will be first. Amen.